So apparently my backyard pool now belongs to the HOA, even though I never signed anything, never paid a fee, and never even agreed to be part of it. I thought homeownership meant having your own space, your little slice of peace where no one could just waltz in and tell you what to do. But as it turns out, all it takes is one overly entitled neighbor with a clipboard and a serious superiority complex to make you question everything. This whole mess started a few months ago, and trust me, I couldn't make this up if I tried. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, not one of those cookie-cutter gated communities, but an older development with a mix of houses, most of them independent and self-governed. When I bought my house 6 years ago, I made sure to avoid anything tied to an HOA. I'd heard enough horror stories to know I didn't want any part of that drama. The property had a lovely backyard, plenty of trees for privacy, and a medium-sized in-ground pool that sealed the deal for me. It was my little sanctuary. I work from home, so being able to take a quick dip during lunch or relax with a drink after a long day was priceless. Everything was great, until a woman I'd never spoken to before, a neighbor from 3 houses down, showed up one afternoon. She stood just outside my fence, arms crossed, looking like she had something official to say. I remember thinking maybe she was there about a lost pet or a package delivered to the wrong address. Instead, the first words out of her mouth were, "You know the HOA has rules about pool colors, right?" I blinked, completely caught off guard. What HOA? She went on to explain, no, more like announce, that my street had recently been absorbed into the neighborhood's Homeowners Association, and that changes were coming. According to her, the pool I had maintained, paid for, and used exclusively for years was now considered part of shared neighborhood resources. I laughed. I honestly thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She was serious. Dead serious. And that laugh would be the last time I found anything remotely funny about what was about to unfold. I didn't know her name at the time, but if there were ever a real-life version of the internet's infamous HOA Karen, she was it. Late 40s, bob haircut so sharp it could slice through glass, and the kind of expression that made you feel guilty just for breathing her air. After that first bizarre encounter at the fence, she started showing up more often. Always uninvited, always unannounced. Sometimes I'd catch her peeking through the slats in the wooden fence as if she was trying to memorize the layout of my backyard. Once, I even saw her standing on a step stool in her driveway, just to get a better view over the dividing hedge. The audacity was almost impressive. A few days after our initial conversation, she returned, this time carrying a clipboard and wearing a lanyard with a plastic badge she clearly printed at home. It had the letters HOA Committee scrawled in bold font, like some kind of homemade authority pass. She called me over from my patio, as if she had every right to summon me. Against my better judgment, I walked to the fence. She started talking like we were in some kind of official meeting. She informed me that my property had been legally absorbed into the boundaries of the newly expanded Homeowners Association. According to her, the houses on our side of the block had previously been in a grey zone and were now being unified under a community charter. I asked her who approved this, who signed off on it, and why I hadn't received a single notice in the mail. She waved it all off, saying I must have missed the flyers and that everyone else had already agreed. She then glanced behind me toward my pool and said with a straight face, "That amenity would be a perfect addition to the shared resources for HOA families. You'll still get to use it, of course, but it's only fair to let others enjoy it too." I laughed again, less out of amusement this time, and more because I couldn't believe she'd just referred to my private pool as a community amenity. And that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone reasonable. I was dealing with a full-blown HOA Karen. It wasn't long after that second encounter that things took a turn from strange to surreal. One morning, I stepped into my backyard with a coffee in hand, ready to enjoy the silence. when I noticed Karen standing just outside my fence again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had another woman with her, someone I vaguely recognized from a few blocks away. They were both staring at my pool, whispering and pointing, like they were surveying it for some grand renovation. I called out, asking if they needed something, and Karen stepped forward with a confident smile that instantly made me uneasy. She pulled out her phone and showed me what she claimed was a map from the HOA's master plan. A grainy image with poorly drawn lines and bright red borders. According to her, my backyard, and specifically my pool, slightly overlapped into what she referred to as community-owned green space. I blinked at the screen, struggling to find any detail that made sense. My fence hadn't moved, my pool hadn't changed, and when I bought the house, all the property lines were crystal clear. But she stood there, insisting that according to the new layout, the pool was now subject to HOA regulations, and worse, open to community use. Then came the real kicker. She said, "Since part of this land is technically ours now, we'll need to schedule access times so neighborhood children can use the pool on weekends." I stared at her in disbelief. I asked her if she seriously thought she could just claim part of my property and assign swim hours like we were in some kind of summer camp. She didn't even flinch. She said, "It's for the good of the community. You'll be thanked for your generosity." I told her flat out that it wasn't happening. My pool was on my land, behind my fence, and paid for with my money. No one was getting access to it. Karen's expression hardened, and she leaned closer to the fence. "You'll be hearing from the board," she warned. "You're setting a dangerous tone for the neighborhood." And with that, she turned and marched away, leaving me completely stunned by what had just happened. A few days passed, and I tried to convince myself that maybe Karen had just been having some kind of weird power trip. Maybe, just maybe, that was the end of it. But then the mail started showing up. At first, I thought it was junk. Envelopes with generic-looking logos and official-sounding names like Community Standards Committee and Neighborhood Improvement Enforcement Division. But when I opened the first one, my stomach dropped. Inside was what looked like a formal citation, complete with a seal and letterhead, accusing me of a violation of HOA Code 4.3, unauthorized personal pool construction. It even included a $250 fine and instructions to remit payment within 14 days. The ridiculousness didn't stop there. Over the next week, I received 3 more letters, each citing some new made-up violation. One said my pool failed to meet aesthetic cohesion standards. Another fined me for denial of public access to shared community space. The last one warned that continued non-compliance could result in legal escalation and property reassessment. It would have been laughable if it weren't so unnerving. The documents looked just real enough to give you that little jolt of anxiety before common sense caught up. I knew this had Karen written all over it. No official HOA would send unsigned, barely legal-looking notices with vague codes and zero documentation. I checked the return address. Just a P.O. box listed under the name Neighborhood Compliance Board. A quick online search revealed it didn't even exist. That's when I realized Karen and probably a couple of her buddies had created some fake HOA committee and were now trying to bully me into submission through sheer intimidation. But I wasn't about to fold. I went down to the county clerk's office and pulled the property records. Clear as day, my house was not, and never had been, under any homeowners association. There was no legal entity governing my property, no shared land, no fees, and no regulations. Armed with that proof, I knew what I had to do. Karen wanted to play pretend? Fine. But I was done humoring her fantasy. It was time to push back, hard. With the property records in hand, I decided it was time to confront the madness head-on. I wasn't just irritated anymore. I was furious. I marched straight over to Karen's house, which had become suspiciously decorated with multiple community watch signs in the yard, as if she were trying to make her fantasy of authority real through sheer branding. She answered the door with her usual smug expression, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. I calmly handed her a copy of the county records and said, "I'm not in your HOA. I never was. This whole thing you're doing, it's not legal." She glanced at the paperwork, barely skimmed it, and waved it off like it was irrelevant. "Those documents are outdated," she said, like she had some hidden stash of secret municipal authority in her garage. Then she launched into a completely unhinged explanation about how my property had been grandfathered in under an older HOA charter that had since been reactivated by her and a few other residents. She actually used the phrase implied consent by location, as if existing within a certain radius of her house automatically made me subject to her rules. I told her flat out that I wasn't going to pay another fake fine. I wasn't granting access to my pool, and if she or her self-appointed board sent me another threatening letter, I'd be filing a harassment claim. That's when she snapped. Her face twisted into this tight little sneer and she said, "You're not above the community. You think just because you've got a fence and a pool, you don't have to participate like the rest of us." I told her this conversation was over and walked away. But it wasn't. The very next weekend, I caught a group of kids trying to open my backyard gate. One of them said, "Karen said we could swim." I had to turn them away kindly, and then installed a padlock on the gate that same day. Later that night, I saw Karen standing across the street, arms crossed, watching my house like some kind of suburban sentry. She wasn't backing down. She was escalating. And I had the growing feeling that this wasn't over. Not even close. After that unsettling weekend, I knew I couldn't just rely on common sense or reason anymore. Karen clearly wasn't operating within either. So I started documenting everything. I kept a file with photos of the fake notices, screenshots of text messages from neighbors who'd heard her spreading lies about me, and even video from my security camera of the kids trying to enter my backyard. I also kept notes on every single interaction with her, time-stamped and detailed. If she wanted to treat this like some kind of legal standoff, then fine. I'd play along, but this time with real professionals on my side. I reached out to a local attorney who specialized in property law. He was a calm, no-nonsense guy who listened patiently as I walked him through the insanity. When I handed him the pile of phony fines and explained Karen's claim about a reactivated HOA, he actually laughed. Not a chuckle, a full-on, head-shaking laugh. He told me I had absolutely nothing to worry about from a legal standpoint. My home wasn't under any HOA, and these people had no legal authority to enforce rules, collect fees, or demand access to my property. But he agreed it was harassment, plain and simple. We drafted a formal cease and desist letter, complete with legal citations and a direct warning that further attempts to claim ownership, levy fines, or gain access to my property would result in legal action. The letter was mailed to Karen, with copies sent to the 2 other residents she'd mentioned as part of her board. We also notified the local police department and filed an official report, so there would be a record in case things escalated further. A few days later, I watched Karen retrieve the envelope from her mailbox. She stood frozen at the curb, reading the first few lines, and then stormed back into her house. For the first time since this circus began, I felt a real sense of control returning. She hadn't expected me to fight back with anything more than a few angry words. But this wasn't a neighborhood drama anymore. This was now a legal wall she couldn't climb. And I was just getting started. Just when I thought the cease and desist would finally knock some sense into her, Karen did what only someone fully immersed in their own delusion would do. She doubled down. The next day, I woke up to find my name plastered all over the neighborhood Facebook group. Karen had written a long, dramatic post accusing me of being a selfish homeowner undermining community unity, and claimed that I had illegally refused shared use of public amenities. She even attached a photo of my pool, taken from the sidewalk, with the caption, "This used to be part of our neighborhood rec area before some people decided to claim it for themselves." That was a complete fabrication. My pool had been built 5 years before I even moved in. There was never a neighborhood recreation area. No playgrounds, no tennis courts, nothing. But Karen's post got attention, and not in the good way. Some people, either her friends or just nosy neighbors looking for drama, started chiming in with things like, "That's not very neighborly," and "If you're part of the community, act like it." A few even said they'd seen my gate locked and asked what I was trying to hide. It was surreal watching the narrative flip in real time. But she didn't stop there. Later that week, I got a knock on my door, an official from the city. Apparently, Karen had filed a complaint accusing me of making unpermitted structural changes to my yard and improperly fencing off public green space. I invited the inspector in, showed him the original permits from when the pool was installed, the property survey, and of course the same county documents that proved my house wasn't within any HOA jurisdiction. The guy was polite, but clearly annoyed that his time had been wasted. He said everything checked out and left with a sigh, promising to file a report closing the complaint. Even then, Karen's grip on reality didn't loosen. She posted again that night, warning neighbors to remain vigilant and to hold selfish individuals accountable. I didn't respond. I let the truth sit quietly on my side of the fence. But something in her behavior had shifted. She wasn't trying to convince me anymore. She was trying to convince everyone else, and that made her even more dangerous. It didn't take long for Karen's fantasy empire to start collapsing under the weight of its own nonsense. A few days after the city inspector closed the bogus complaint, I got a copy of his final report in the mail. It clearly stated that all structures on my property, including the pool and the fencing, were legal and properly permitted. No violations. No further action required. I didn't waste any time. I scanned that document, along with my original county records, and posted them straight to the same neighborhood Facebook group where Karen had been stirring the pot. The reaction was immediate. People who had been on the fence or silently watching from the sidelines began speaking up. Comments flooded in. "Wait, so there's no real HOA? I thought she said this was a community property. She told me we all had to start paying dues next month." A few brave neighbors messaged me privately to apologize for assuming the worst, or believing her version of the story. Turns out, Karen had been going door to door with her clipboard, convincing people to join her interim committee, telling them it would soon become an official HOA, and that they needed to fall in line early to have voting rights. It was all smoke and mirrors. One neighbor, a retired attorney, even chimed in on the thread and broke down exactly why Karen's little operation was completely illegitimate. He explained that without a legal charter, unanimous homeowner consent, and formal registration, no HOA could just spring up and start enforcing rules or collecting money. His comment was the final nail in the coffin. The myth Karen had built of authority, structure, and community oversight vanished overnight. Suddenly, the same people who had been giving me cold looks were now ignoring Karen altogether. Her Facebook post disappeared. The HOA committee sign she'd nailed to her front lawn mysteriously vanished the next morning. And for the first time in weeks, the sidewalk in front of my house was quiet. No more kids trying to sneak into the yard. No more sideways glances from neighbors. Just peace. The storm had passed, and all it took was the truth, shared loud enough for everyone to hear. With the neighborhood finally seeing Karen for what she was, I decided it was time to finish this once and for all. I wasn't interested in revenge. I just wanted closure, a clean break from the absurdity. But I also wasn't going to let her walk away from weeks of harassment, false claims, and psychological warfare without consequences. So with my attorney's guidance, I filed a claim in small claims court. It wasn't for a ridiculous amount, just enough to cover the legal consultation fees, the new gate lock, the security camera system I'd had to install, and a bit for the sheer headache of dealing with her antics. I sent her a pre-litigation notice, outlining everything she had done, including copies of the fake fines, the cease and desist letter, and the city's dismissal of her complaint. 2 days later, I received a response, not from Karen directly, but from someone claiming to represent her in a mediatory capacity. It was laughable, like she was trying to hold on to whatever scraps of imaginary status she thought she had. They offered a quiet settlement. She would pay the amount in full if I agreed not to pursue further legal action or public defamation. I didn't care about smearing her name. I just wanted this chapter closed. I accepted. After that, she all but vanished from the neighborhood spotlight. Her HOA board dissolved. The 2 neighbors she'd roped into her fantasy distanced themselves quickly, one of them even showing up at my door to apologize and bring cookies as a peace offering. Karen stopped walking past my house altogether. If I ever saw her, it was only in quick glimpses, ducking into her car or retreating behind her curtains. With the money from the settlement, I upgraded my backyard security and built a taller, more private fence, something I'd been planning to do anyway. No more stairs, no more entitlement creeping over the fence line. Just quiet, peace, the way it was meant to be. And as I floated in my pool one sunny afternoon, the water calm and the world finally still, I couldn't help but smile. Karen's power trip had ended not with a bang, but with a legal receipt and a return to normalcy. Looking back, it still amazes me how something as simple as a pool could spark such chaos. I never set out to be the neighborhood rebel or the guy who goes to legal war with a wannabe HOA dictator. I just wanted to enjoy my home, my space, the little piece of peace I'd worked hard for. But apparently, peace is a threat to people like Karen, people who crave control and validation so desperately that they'll invent authority out of thin air. What started as a bizarre conversation at the fence turned into a weeks-long saga of fake fines, Facebook smear campaigns, and city inspections. All because one woman couldn't accept that I didn't want to be part of her made-up kingdom. In the end, I learned a lot more than I expected. I learned the value of keeping records, the importance of knowing your property rights, and just how far some people will go when they think no one will push back. But most of all, I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it feels ridiculous, is absolutely worth it. Karen didn't just want my pool, she wanted control. And once she realized she couldn't have it, the whole illusion crumbled. Now, the neighborhood's back to normal. No more community watch signs glaring at me, no more awkward side glances, just birds, breeze, and the sound of water as I float in the sanctuary I fought to protect. If Karen's out there plotting her next scheme, I wouldn't know. I've got taller fences now. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone like her tries to claim what isn't theirs, they'll remember the guy who stood his ground and made sure they couldn't rewrite the rules of reality with a clipboard and a smile.